Sarah received an unexpected invitation from her college friends on a sunny June day. She'd been feeling down lately, so the invitation came as a pleasant surprise. Sarah had lost touch with most of her college friends over the years, but she remembered their wild and carefree days together fondly. Sarah jumped at the chance to spend some quality time with old friends when she received an invitation to a weekend getaway at a remote cabin. According to the invitation, "Hello, Sarah. We're planning a weekend getaway in the woods and would love to have you join us. We haven't seen each other in far too long, and we can't wait to catch up. Please let us know if you will be able to attend." Sarah couldn't believe her good fortune. She quickly picked up the phone and called her friend Alice to let her know she'd be there. "Sarah, it's wonderful to hear from you," Alice exclaimed with glee. "We're all really looking forward to reuniting the gang. It has been far too long. Spend some time with her old friends." Sarah laughed. She could feel the excitement building within her. "I can't wait to see everyone and reminisce," she said. "Same here," Alice explained. "We're leaving on Friday afternoon, so pack your bags and prepare to have a good time." Sarah spent the next few days getting ready for her trip. She packed comfortable clothing, hiking boots, and a few board games. She was looking forward to spending time in nature and catching up with old friends. Sarah left for the cabin on Friday afternoon. The journey was long and winding, but the scenery was spectacular. She arrived just as the sun was setting, and her friends greeted her warmly. "Sarah, you did it," Alice exclaimed, hugging her tightly. "We're overjoyed you're here." Sarah felt immediately at ease when the rest of the group greeted her warmly. They spent the evening catching up, telling stories, and laughing themselves silly. Sarah couldn't help but be grateful for the invitation as the night progressed. She was surrounded by people who loved and cared for her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. She knew it was going to be a memorable weekend. As Sarah awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, the morning sun shone brightly. She stretched her arms and legs, feeling energized and ready for the day ahead. As she dressed and walked outside, she was greeted by towering trees, a tranquil lake, and a soft breeze carrying the sweet scent of pine. She took a deep breath of fresh air, thankful for the beauty all around her. Sarah could hear her friends talking and laughing inside the cabin as she made her way there. She couldn't wait to meet them and begin the day's activities. As she entered, her friends greeted her with hugs and smiles. They were still in their pajamas, but the aroma of bacon and coffee wafting through the air indicated that breakfast was on the way. "Good day, Sarah," Alice stated. "Did you get enough sleep?" "Thank you," Sarah replied. "This place is incredible. I can't believe how lovely it is here." "We're so happy you could come," Alice said. "We have a lot planned for today, so get ready to have a good time." Sarah smiled, experiencing a sense of belonging and happiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. She sat down with her friends at the table and ate a delicious breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast. The group decided to go for a walk around the lake after breakfast. They put on their hiking boots and set out, admiring the natural beauty of the area. They talked and caught up on old times as they walked. Being surrounded by old friends brought Sarah comfort and joy, and she knew it was exactly what she needed. Sarah noticed a strange expression on Alice's face as they neared the end of the trail. Sarah noticed a sudden shift in the atmosphere as she appeared concerned. "Is everything all right, Alice?" Sarah inquired. Alice paused for a beat before responding. "It's just, I'm fine. Something is making me nervous. I'll inform you later." Sarah could feel a knot forming in her stomach. She didn't want anything to ruin the weekend, but she also knew how important her friends were to her. She made a mental note to contact Alice later and see if there was anything she could do to assist. Sarah felt uneasy as the group made their way back to the cabin. She wasn't sure what was causing it, but she was aware that something wasn't quite right. She tried to ignore the feeling and concentrate on the rest of the weekend with her friends. Sarah and her friends sat around the campfire in the evening air, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl as the stars twinkled brightly above. Sarah was content and happy, surrounded by her friends' warmth and the beauty of the wilderness. She couldn't recall the last time she felt so relaxed. As the night progressed, the group decided to play a card game. They sat around a makeshift table, laughing and joking as they dealt the cards. Sarah felt a closeness to her friends she hadn't felt in a long time. She treasured these moments and knew they would be memories she would cherish for the rest of her life. As the game came to a close, Alice spoke up. "Hey, I've got an idea. Let's play a truth or dare game." The group agreed, and they took turns asking questions and performing dares on each other, all in good fun. And Sarah burst out laughing harder than she had in a long time. Sarah noticed that Alice was becoming increasingly nervous as the game progressed. She kept looking over her shoulder and appeared to be distracted. "Are you all right, Alice?" Sarah inquired. Alice paused for a beat before responding. I guess I'm just a little tense. I keep getting the impression that something is watching us. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She tried to dismiss it, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sarah couldn't help but think that Alice's words were true as they continued the game. The woods seemed to be alive with an unseen presence, and she had the impression that they were being watched. The group eventually decided to call it a night. They put out the fire and went inside to rest. Sarah dragged herself into bed, exhausted but restless. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She tried to ignore the feeling and concentrate on sleeping, but she found herself tossing and turning. Sarah couldn't help but wonder what the rest of the weekend would bring as she lay in the dark. She tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and concentrate on having fun with her friends, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Sarah awoke the next morning feeling refreshed but a little uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but she tried to ignore it and concentrate on the day ahead. The group decided to go on a walk after breakfast to explore the surrounding wilderness. Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were being watched as they walked along the trail. She looked around nervously, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. She tried to ignore it and concentrate on the beauty of the forest around them. Sarah noticed something strange as they walked deeper into the woods. There was a strange metallic and acrid odor in the air. "Do you guys smell that?" she inquired. Her friends sniffed the air, but they didn't seem to detect anything unusual. Sarah paused for a moment before continuing. "I believe we should return. Something isn't quite right." Her friends, however, dismissed her concerns and insisted that they continue. They were curious about what lay ahead. The smell became stronger as they progressed. Sarah began to feel dizzy and stumbled a little on the trail. "Guys, we have to go back. Something is wrong." Her voice was trembling as she spoke. But before anyone could respond, they came to a clearing after rounding a bend in the trail. That's when they noticed it. In the middle of the clearing, there was a small campsite set up. Tents were strewn about, and a small fire smoldered in the center. But that wasn't what piqued their interest. It was the sight of a man lying motionless on the ground. Sarah's heart began to pound in her chest. "Oh my God, is he dead?" she asked quietly. Her companions rushed over to the man's side to check for a pulse. He was still alive, but only just. "We need to call for help," Sarah said urgently. However, they were miles from civilization and had no cell phone reception. They noticed something strange as they looked around the campsite. There was no trace of the man's equipment or supplies. It was as if he had been dumped there with no supplies. Sarah's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of what was going on. What was his name? What had become of him? Sarah couldn't help but think they'd stumbled upon something dangerous as they sat in the clearing, waiting for help. And she was well aware that their enjoyable weekend in the woods had taken a very dark turn. The arrival of the rescue team was a relief, but it also signaled the start of an investigation. The man they had discovered in the clearing had been taken to the hospital, and the police had been called to investigate. The police had questioned Sarah and her friends, and they had told them everything they knew. They had no idea who the man was or how he ended up in the middle of nowhere with no supplies. Sarah and her friends sat around the campfire as the sun began to set, shaken and uncertain. "We need to figure out what's going on," Sarah stated firmly. Her friends agreed with a nod. They did not want to wait for the police to solve the mystery. They wanted to help in any way they could. They began their own investigation over the next few days. They spoke with residents to see if anyone had seen the man before. They combed the surrounding woods for any clues that could help them solve the mystery. They pored over maps and online resources for hours, trying to piece together the puzzle of what had happened. Sarah felt a sense of purpose she had never felt before as they worked. She had always been fascinated by puzzles and mysteries, but she had never had the opportunity to do so in such a genuine and meaningful way. Sarah felt a growing sense of pride and accomplishment as they discovered new information. She could tell they were making progress and getting closer to solving the mystery. But as they dug deeper into the investigation, they discovered some disturbing information. They discovered that the man they had discovered in the clearing was not the only one who had gone missing in the area. There had been several other cases of hikers and campers going missing without a trace over the years. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the magnitude of the mystery they were confronted with. This was no ordinary case of a misplaced hiker. Something far more sinister was afoot. Despite the mounting danger, Sarah and her friends refused to back down. They were determined to solve the mystery at any cost. They knew they were getting closer to the truth as their investigation progressed, and they were aware that the key to unlocking the mystery was just ahead. Tensions began to rise as Sarah and her friends dug deeper into the mystery of the disappearances in the woods. Suspicions began to fly, and accusations were leveled. Sarah couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Her once close circle of friends was now split, each convinced that the others were hiding something. It all started with small things. Someone would be accused of not searching thoroughly enough or of concealing information. However, as the investigation progressed, the allegations became more serious. Sarah was accused of purposefully misleading the group at one point. She was hurt and angry, but she recognized that tensions were high. The group had been working together for weeks, and the strain was beginning to show. Everyone was exhausted, and feelings were running high. Sarah, despite the accusations, refused to give up. She knew they were getting close to figuring out the mystery, and she was determined to see it through. As the investigation continued, the group began to piece together a picture of what had occurred. They discovered that a serial killer was on the loose in the area, preying on hikers and campers. The killer was cunning and elusive, making it difficult for the group to apprehend him. Sarah, on the other hand, refused to give up. She sifted through maps and witness statements, looking for any hints that could lead them to the killer. After weeks of tireless investigation, they finally found a crucial piece of evidence that led them to the killer's lair. They were nervous as they approached the cabin in the woods, not knowing what they would find. However, as they entered, they came face to face with the murderer. After a struggle, the group was able to subdue the killer and hand him over to the police. Sarah was tired but relieved. The mystery was solved, and justice was served. Sarah and her friends talked about everything they had been through that night as they sat around the campfire. It had all been worth it. The accusations, the tension, the fear. They'd worked together to solve a mystery, and in the process, they'd grown closer than they'd ever been. Sarah knew she'd be grateful for the experience and the friends who had supported her through it all. Sarah and her friends could finally breathe a sigh of relief after the killer was apprehended. But their work was not yet finished. They still needed to find the hikers and campers who had vanished without a trace. The group was adamant about finding them before it was too late. They were aware that time was ticking away and that every second counted. Sarah's heart was racing as they set out on their search. She couldn't help but think about the missing hikers and campers' families and the desperate hope they must be feeling. The group split up, with each person searching a different section of the woods. They searched every inch of the forest for any sign of the missing people. Sarah's anxiety grew as the hours passed. They had been looking for hours and had come up empty-handed. Sarah's friend Alex sobbed just as they were about to give up hope. "Over here," he exclaimed. Sarah dashed towards his voice, her heart pounding. As she got closer, she noticed Alex standing near a small clearing in the woods. One of the missing hikers was lying on the ground. Sarah's heart sank when she saw the hiker's state. She was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and injured. She had clearly been through a terrible ordeal. Sarah, on the other hand, refused to give up hope. She knew they had to find the others and that every second was crucial. The group pushed forward with renewed zeal. They searched through the night, navigating the dark forest with flashlights. Finally, as the sun rose, they discovered another of the missing campers. It was a bittersweet moment as they treated the camper's injury and requested assistance. They had located 2 of the missing individuals, but there were still others out there. Sarah reflected on the race against time they had been in as they waited for help. She was confident that they had done everything possible to locate the missing people, and she was proud of what they had accomplished. Finally, the hunt was over. All of the missing hikers and campers had been located and were on their way to medical treatment. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment as she and her friends packed their belongings and prepared to leave the woods. They had collaborated to solve a mystery, saving lives in the process. Sarah knew she'd never forget the experience as they walked out of the woods. It had been a difficult journey, but it had brought her closer to her friends and demonstrated what they could accomplish when they worked together. Sarah and her friends were determined to see justice served on the day of the trial. They sat in the courtroom, anticipating the start of the proceedings. Sarah couldn't help but feel satisfied as the killer was brought in. This was the person who had caused so much pain and suffering, and now they would be held accountable for their actions. The trial was drawn out and exhausting, with witness after witness testifying against the murderer. Sarah and her friends sat through it all, determined to finish it. Finally, it was time for the verdict to be read aloud. As the judge began to speak, Sarah's heart began to race. The judge stated, "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Sarah and her friends breathed a sigh of relief. They had completed the task. They had aided in the prosecution of a murderer. Sarah felt a sense of closure as they left the courthouse. They had finally arrived at the end of a long and difficult journey. But there was one more thing they needed to do. They had to say their final goodbyes to the woods, which had been the site of so much pain and suffering. The group returned to the woods one last time to pay their respects to the victim and to say their final goodbyes to the location where they had spent so much time searching for the missing hikers and campers. Sarah felt at peace as they stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the forest. They had come a long way since their arrival and were now prepared to move on. but they'd never forget what they'd learned in those woods. They had learned the value of perseverance, the value of teamwork, and the importance of never giving up hope. Sarah knew she'd always remember those lessons as they walked out of the woods for the last time. And she knew that whatever challenges awaited her, she and her friends would be prepared to face them together. The trial had concluded, and Sarah and her friends could finally exhale a sigh of relief. They had accomplished their mission, and justice had been served. Even though the murderer was imprisoned, the tragedy's aftermath lingered. The victims' families were still in mourning, and the community was still trying to make sense of what had happened. Sarah and her friends recognized their obligation to assist those affected by the tragedy. They'd been there before, and they knew how difficult it could be to move on. As a result, they began organizing a support group for the victims' families. They enlisted the help of counselors and therapists, and together they created a safe space for people to share their story and find solace in one another's company. It was a challenging process, but Sarah and her friends were determined to make a difference. They put in countless hours organizing meetings and events, and they were always willing to lend a sympathetic ear or a shoulder to cry on. They began to see progress over time. People who had been paralyzed by grief were regaining their footing, and the community was beginning to heal. And as they worked to help others, Sarah and her friends discovered that they were also healing. They had been through a traumatic experience, but now they found meaning in helping others. Sarah and her friends realized after a few months that they had formed an unbreakable bond. They'd been through so much together, and they'd come out stronger and more resilient than ever. They knew they'd never forget the tragedy that had brought them together, but they'd also never forget the love and support they'd shown each other. And as they reflected on their journey, they realized they had accomplished something truly extraordinary. They had turned a tragedy into a source of strength, demonstrating that there is always hope even in the darkest of times.